Mr. President, Republicans continue to come to the floor to talk about the urgent need that we have to reform America's health care system. And the reason we continue to do this, Mr. President, is because the pain of Obamacare is getting worse. We're seeing it all across the country. The health care system in this country has been devastated by a law known as Obamacare. Every weekend at home, I hear, as Republicans all around the country hear, about the costs that have been spiraling out of control. Out of control. Doubled on the Obamacare exchange, we hear across the country, but in many states, even more than that. In Wyoming, up 107% over the past 4 years. We also hear from people at home about how their specific premiums on the exchange, they're worried about them going even higher next year. So not only have they doubled, but they're worried about going up again. Just this past week, we've heard stories about numbers that have been requested for increases in New Hampshire, in New York, in Maine. You're hearing it all across the country. I hear it every weekend in Wyoming. People are very concerned about the impact that Obamacare has had on their lives personally. Many will tell you that they believe that the insurance that they bought under Obamacare has been of not less value than they would have liked. And many people are not buying because they see that the value is not there. So when we hear about these increasing rates, and we hear about the fact that it's going to even get worse, people are saying, the costs have gone up. Maybe we ought to try to shop around. Maybe we can find more choices. The problem is the choices are going down as well. Insurance companies are continuing to drop out of the Obamacare plan so that people around the country are having fewer and fewer choices under Obamacare. Last Friday, headline in the Wall Street Journal, another area loses last ACA insurer. Not just that they have fewer, now we're looking at places in the country where there are no choices. In Wyoming, we had two. One of the companies went out of business. They're down to one. That company has lost money. The question is, how long will they stay? How much higher will they have to raise rates under Obamacare? Will we be at a point where the counties in our state, instead of having one, have none? This article in the Wall Street Journal last week says Washington State has no insurer, none, willing to offer Affordable Care Act plans next year in some of its 39 counties. A few days earlier, we heard the news for the people in a similar situation in Ohio, 18 counties in Ohio next year. No plans offering. So if you have Obamacare and you're going to get a subsidy, there's no place to use the subsidy. You have no choices. But we have warned from the beginning about the Obamacare death spiral, and we're seeing it happen here. And for people living in those counties in Ohio and those counties in Washington, the insurance death spiral is complete. There is no insurance market. There is no one offering to sell insurance because of the damage done by Obamacare to the insurance market in the United States. So you have millions of people across the country who have been harmed by the higher costs and the fewer and fewer choices available under Obamacare. They've lost the coverage they had. Care is not available to them in the sense that their insurance is not available to them, and the options are shrinking all across the country and have completely gone away in certain places. Now, if you are someone who is living with a pre-existing condition, and so much of the debate, and I hear my colleagues from the other side of the aisle come to the floor and talk about pre-existing conditions. If you're someone in any of these counties and you have a pre-existing condition, and the company that you buy your insurance from goes out of business, and there is no one to sell you insurance in the county in which you live, and you have a pre-existing condition, under Obamacare, you are out of luck. You may get a subsidy, but you cannot buy a policy. So under Obamacare, pre-existing conditions are not covered if there is no one available to sell a policy, and we're seeing more and more counties falling into that situation. Big, almost full-page map in the New York Times earlier this week of the number of counties across the country where there are only two insurance companies selling, or one, or none at all. That is the problem that we have all across the country, and we have predicted this. This disaster of Obamacare was entirely predictable. Republicans came to the floor as it was being debated, as it was being discussed, as Democrats were voting on it, and we continued to point out that we are in a situation, we would be in a situation of free fall, and we are now in that situation with Obamacare. Republicans know what we need to do. We're trying to stabilize the market. We want to protect people with pre-existing conditions. We want to lower the cost of premiums. We don't want the rug to be pulled out from anyone, and we're trying to reform Medicaid in a way that provides long-term stability to that program. Well, finally, after all of these years of talking about the problems with Obamacare and so many Democrats with blinders on, wanting to just apply a blank check to the problem, saying more money, more Obamacare. Finally now, some Democrats are saying, yeah, there are problems with Obamacare. The problem, Mr. President, is their solution is the wrong solution. What they want to do is make the problem even bigger, and we are seeing that we've seen it in California this past year. Actually, just a week ago, the California Senate, after calls, and it's a Democrat-controlled Senate, after calls from people throughout their political party and at their political convention a couple of weeks ago, have said, we know what to do, single-payer health care. That's what they proposed, and it passed along party lines. Now, who is that single payer? Well, it's the American taxpayer. So the Democrat-controlled Senate in California passed a single-payer health care bill. Cradle to grave, everyone covered, anything you need, you got it, it says in California. Well, you know, Mr. President, I served in the Wyoming State Legislature. I know you served at your state level in the legislature. You know, we do something called a fiscal note. What is something like this going to cost? They did the same thing in California. The fiscal note was $400 billion a year. Well, then you put it in perspective. How does that fit into the state budget? Well, the full cost, the general fund for the state of California for a year, where they've just passed a bill for $400 billion, is only $190 billion. The total cost of what the state Senate of California passed is twice the entire general fund of the state of California. You know, what's happened in other places where they say we need a single-payer plan, as they've done in Canada and England, is that leads to longer lines, waiting periods, and the rationing of care. That is not what the American people want, but it is what the Democrat Party is proposing and actually voted for in the state of California. Now, this was a headline in the New York Times just the other day. Quote, the single-payer party. Democrats shift left on health care. The article goes on to say that, in terms of the Democrats, cast out of power in Washington and most state capitals, Democrats and activist leaders seeking political redemption have embraced an unlikely seeming cause, it says, an actual government takeover of health care. New York Times about what's passed in California and what Democrats around the country are proposing. And in the U.S. House of Representatives, right down the hall of this building, in the U.S. House of Representatives, a majority of the Democrats have co-sponsored legislation to go to a single-payer health care plan. Majority of the Democrats in the House, single-payer health care plan. It's not what hardworking Americans want. That's not what struggling small business owners want. That's not what the people of Wyoming want. People at home already can't afford to pay for the insurance that has been mandated that they buy under the Obama health care law. They can't afford the penalties, they can't afford the insurance, and they want health care. Care they need from a doctor they choose at lower cost. How in the world is this country going to afford higher taxes to pay for Democrats' single-payer fantasy? But that's what they're looking at in California. To double the cost of the state general fund, you're talking about raising taxes as well as probably eliminating some services. I mean, would you have to eliminate teachers, firefighters, public safety workers? I mean, those are the things you have to wonder about when they make such an irresponsible decision in the California State Senate. You know, Ronald Reagan, I think he said it best when he said, you can't be for big government and big taxes and a big bureaucracy and still be for the little guy. Ronald Reagan had it right. Now, Washington Democrats want to ignore that. Small business owners know what Democrats in Washington, D.C. and in California refuse to acknowledge right now. The small business owners know it. The Democrats won't acknowledge it. People around the country realize that Obamacare is not working. That's why we've elected a Republican House, a Republican Senate, a Republican president. Because of the pain caused by the American people under the Obama health care law, which mandated everybody buy a government-approved product. And the costs have gone up, the choices have gone down, and people are left in a state where this is not what works for us. So here we are. We're on the cusp of coming out with a Republican plan. We're trying to do it with our legislation, writing a reform plan to reduce health care costs, improve access to insurance, without the mandates and the restrictions that we have seen under the Obama health care law. I think Democrats should join us in finding the best solutions for the American people. The time to act is now, because as we see from week to week, more are pulling out of the health, more of those who sell insurance are pulling out. People with pre-existing conditions who lose their coverage will have nowhere to turn under Obamacare. And we continue to fight for our patients. As a doctor, I know what patients need, and it's the care that they need from a doctor they choose at lower costs. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.